Alright, so my name is Erin Curtis. In this presentation, I will sort of give a brief description of my journey from student to teacher, which really began last semester in the fall when I began my observation. So, early years, as you can see, my clear happiness of my first day of school and my love of purple started pretty early. I have always really liked learning. I am a huge bookworm. I didn't necessarily like school that much. It was kind of fun. I liked it okay. I thought it was pretty boring at first in elementary school and then in middle school a little bit. And then starting in middle school and in high school, I had a few teachers that really got to me and really inspired me to become a teacher. So I didn't know that I wanted to become a teacher until I was in high school. So a little bit later than some of the other people that were teaching in kindergarten. So I've always really liked learning. My major inspiration as far as my teachers are concerned was my 11th grade AP US teacher. And I took her class, and that's when I knew for sure that I wanted to be a history teacher. I wanted to teach just like her. I loved lecture style classes. I thought it was like I was sitting at story time. I thought it was great. I was like, I'm going to do that one day, before I realized that not everyone else is like that. And then I had to kind of change my opinion of how I would teach. And two major influences on how I teach now were both my observation last semester as well as my student teaching this semester. So, for my student observation, I was in an 8th grade civics and economics classroom. I did not teach while I was observing. I taught maybe 2 days total. But I did learn a lot. I learned a lot about behavior management. My cooperating teacher was on the stricter side. She had very set expectations that the students knew that they were going to follow, and I really respected that she had done that. There were no questions about what was acceptable and what was not in the classroom. They already knew. So I liked that she had started from the very beginning telling them exactly what she was expecting. I did have the opportunity to mirror teach on 2 different occasions. I got to use a Prezi, which kind of kicked off my intense love for them, as well as the digital humanities class last semester. But for the most part, what I ended up doing, other than making copies, was I worked with the inclusion students and what my cooperating teacher called the low students. So these were students with IEPs and 504s, as well as the students that were just struggling in the classroom. So I would every day take a group of about 4 to 5 students to the library, and we would work on what they needed help with. We would kind of do remedial stuff, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure they weren't getting behind, since they already were. And another major factor of this is their attitude. Because every time we went to the library, they would talk, because we'd go out from the trailers, out behind school, all the way to the library. The whole walk, they'd be like, oh, we're the dumb group, we have to go to the library. So I tried to make it very clear that they were not the dumb group, they just need a little bit of extra help. So that actually taught me a lot in my teaching, and it came in very handy later when I was teaching an entire classroom. The small group work I thought worked really well for these students, and they seemed to really enjoy it because they were with other people who were struggling with very similar things that they were. So I tried to foster kind of their camaraderie within their groups and show them that they weren't the only ones having trouble in the class. Other people struggled too. Also told them how I didn't do so well in civics and economics either when I was in school, but I was teaching them now so they could learn it and they would be fine. And I think it really helped them. And while I couldn't help all the students, I thought that it was a really good insight into different types of students and doing different kinds of teaching in the classroom, which I later brought to my other class. I also had one of the special ed teachers tell me that I should switch into their program, which I sort of laughed at and then said no. But I thought that this was really important, and it really helped inform my teaching for later. This semester, I worked in a 9th grade World History 1 classroom. The majority of my students were 9th graders. I had some that were a little bit older, whether they were taking it because they had moved here or because they had failed it before, whatever. And I taught 5 major units. I did Byzantine Empire, Islamic Empire, early Russia and the Mongols, the early Middle Ages, and Africa, Asia, and the Americas. So I was covering a lot. I was pretty much thrown in immediately. I observed for a little while, and then I was on my own, which was terrifying, but awesome at the same time. And from observing the couple of weeks that I got to be in there, I noticed that a lot of the students weren't very engaged. I had kids in the back that were sleeping. They weren't necessarily really interested. So I decided that when I got up there and I was teaching, I was going to try and make it interesting. And that was my major goal. So, my early lessons. My main goal was to combat boredom. I could see that the kids weren't interested in the subject. I really wanted them to be. So I tried to think to myself, what can I do to really invest the kids in their own learning? So in an effort to get their attention, I tried making lessons shiny or sexy. I didn't know if I could write that up there. So I was using different lesson plans every single day, different activities, different things. No 2 lessons were the same in a week. And that got really tiring pretty quickly. It wore me down, not only because I was spending 7 or 8 hours a day per lecture, and I was getting a little bit behind, but I would get these awesome lectures that I was so excited about, and my students asked me why I wasn't letting them sleep, and it was a little bit frustrating. And during this time, I also watched the students a lot, and I noticed what was not working. So things that I thought were going to be great, they did not like. One example, which should look pretty familiar to the history people, was a lesson entirely on Byzantine art and architecture. So I started off with a Just Do It, comparing different types of art, which they did think was kind of cool. So I got excited and I thought that this was going to work really well. Went through, did standards, pretty basic structure, told them what we were going to be doing that day. I tried to get them excited and it did not work. Put up my big questions. And then we had a very brief lecture, note-taking section. We went over location, inspiration, types, characteristics of different types of Byzantine art. We then talked about architecture in the Byzantine Empire, and specifically we went on a 3D tour of the Hagia Sophia. I thought this was awesome. I was asking them questions. I was having them tell me different types of Byzantine art and architecture that they saw in the tour. And it was like pulling teeth for almost all of the classes. The college kids hated it. They thought that it was an excuse for them to not pay attention because it was me in the front of the classroom pointing out different things, asking questions, and they could kind of hide in the back. My honors class loved it and they got really into it. And this was my first real experience seeing that I really had to differentiate between my college and honors level classes. What worked for one was definitely not going to always work for the other. And that was a major lesson that I learned. So I tried using these really cool things, tried to make sure that it wasn't boring. It didn't always work. But that really did help me set up what I started doing later. Particularly, before each class, I would outline the chapter that the students were reading so I would know exactly what they were looking at. From there, I would base my class off of that, whatever activities we were going to do, if I was lecturing, if I was doing group work, whatever. So I started on my own note sheet. I started making notes of what was working for which classes. If the kids really liked a popcorn review in one class, I would try and use that again. If they hated 3D tours, which they didn't use that one anymore. And so I tried to gauge what they thought while I was teaching and incorporate that more. I noticed that a lot of my college level classes were a lot more comfortable with the information if they were allowed to work in pairs or small groups. So I started incorporating that more into the classes. So what I learned in the beginning was very influential for what I then started doing later. Closing activity, which I also thought was really cool and they also did not like.